Hello, my name is Jake Agnew, and the topic that I did was bike lanes in Washington, D.C. So there are many bike lanes throughout the city of Washington, D.C. Since 2001, there's been 89 miles of bike lanes built in the district, and these numbers are looking to increase throughout the next couple of years. And there are many different types of bike lanes throughout the city, most of which are protected from the cars, as you can see in the pictures that I included. The one on the left, there's actually like a concrete barrier between the bike lane and then the street where the cars drive on. And then others, as you can see on the right, there's not as much protection, but there's definitely a distinct area that's built into the pattern of the road for bikes to use. So these spaces are specifically designed for bicyclists, and it's to help eliminate the use of sidewalks, which makes it safer for pedestrians to use the sidewalks and not have to worry about the bikes cruising by. There's a significant environmental impact in DC when it comes to the bike lanes and people using cars for their commutes. With a city of over 600,000, if more people started to use their bikes to commute, even if they commuted to work or if they just used them like to ride to the store or places like that, it would help cut back on the carbon emissions significantly. After I did my research, I found that the average car produces 271 grams of carbon dioxide per kilometer a person drives the car. So this is a pretty small impact per person, but when you look at the number of people that are using cars in DC, if a small amount of those people regularly use bikes instead, you could significantly cut back on those carbon emissions, and this would help make the air a lot cleaner for all the residents of the Washington, D.C. area. When I first started doing my research on this topic, I thought it was pretty straightforward. I thought that a lot of people would be in favor of adding bike lanes, especially to a city like Washington, D.C. There's, based on all the positive effects that I saw, when it comes to the climate and carbon emissions and the cleaner air and cutting back on costs. You don't have to spend money on gas if you ride your bike everywhere. And I thought the impacts were pretty straightforward, but that actually turned out to not be the case, especially when it comes down to the community level. Adding bike lanes actually has quite a large effect on the smaller communities and kind of like the culture that they have in those communities. So when you add bike lanes to a busy street, you have to cut down on the number of lanes that are designated specifically for the cars to use. So that kind of creates a backup, especially during like rush hours, and those cars then, instead of going on those main roads, they start to use the back roads more, and this creates congestion through these smaller communities. Looking at the community level, you see that an increase of traffic through those neighborhoods disrupts a lot of things that go on. And also then when you look at adding bike lanes in these smaller communities, as you can see in the picture that I added here, it's a specific bike lane that was added through a community that you can see they have like storefronts right there. And you can see that this takes away from the parking spaces that are available for the customers of these small businesses. So something that you wouldn't really think about is actually very impactful for these communities. Another thing when it comes to how these bike lanes affect the communities, it has to do with the gentrification and how the communities were mostly made up of Black African Americans, and how when these newer upper class white Americans moved into these neighborhoods, all of a sudden they started advocating for the increase of bike lanes, and also in the in the article that I read, they were talking about adding dog parks, and it's something that the people that lived here before, they weren't feeling like these new people that were coming in were really advocating for the community, but more for their personal interests. So it creates this divide among the people that live in these neighborhoods, and that's something that I thought was really interesting, because it's something that I didn't think about prior to doing the research, is how it would affect the culture of the neighborhoods and how people interact. I read an article where the reporter talked to a local from one of these neighborhoods that are being affected by these bike lanes, and they said that the problem in DC is that as a whole, they aren't seeing the bigger picture. And when they go on to talk about the bike lanes specifically, they said that the decisions are being made one street at a time, and they're not really taking into consideration how it's going to affect the next street. And they really need to look at the community as a whole, but then also look and see how those changes in that community are going to affect the next, and keep the bigger picture in mind. It's been very eye-opening through the process of doing research for this project that when a city like DC plans to make changes and additions to their transportation infrastructure, that it affects many different communities and in many different ways. The process is not very straightforward on, making these additions will positively impact this community, because when it affects one community one way, it doesn't affect all communities equally. And I think this is extremely important for a city like DC to consider when making these types of changes and additions. It's very important for them to consider the pros and cons for all the people that these changes affect.